Hi everyone, I'm Allie and this is Hannah and we're from the Carle Bookshop and we're back with another video in our series Bookshop Talks. But this one is a rant edition. So Hannah and I have each brought two books so that at the mere mention of their titles, we will both launch into a very passionate rant that nobody asked for. But we can do whatever we want in this video, so we may talk for a while.
That's okay. You guys can stay tuned in as long as you want.
Yeah, it's gonna be monstrous. I'm excited.
Oh yeah.
So Hannah, what did you bring to start with?
I'm so glad you asked, Allie. So frequently at the museum, I get a question of, I love graphic novels, but I want something a bit more scientific. And I say, there's only one that you need. And Neil Gaiman agrees. It is called The Way of the Hive by J. Hosler. And the internet says that J. Hosler has done for bees what Richard Adams did for rabbits. So whenever anyone asks about a nonfiction graphic novel, this is the first one that I give them because it is my absolute favorite, and not just because we all need to save the bees and get on board, but because it is so beautifully illustrated and you get so attached to these tiny little characters that are just so good and have so much personality. And I know that, and this is a disclaimer that I give every time, because I know that these animals are anthropomorphized, but it helps so much for us to be able to relate to them and see that they're just like us. So The Way of the Hive, a honeybee's story. This is our main character. This is Miyuki, and we meet her at the very beginning of her life when she's a larva. And I'll just read you an excerpt without spoiling anything.
Awesome, because I haven't read it yet.
Oh, it's so good. Once upon a time, there was a whole lot of nothing. And then that goes on. The nothing was everywhere, and it was very stubborn. It didn't want to change. And then, just like that, something else appeared. It was a small, delicate flower bud, floating quietly in a great garden of darkness. It just floated there. And then one day, the bud did something. It opened its petals, slowly at first, because it was kind of shy. But once it started, it couldn't stop. Felt good to stretch out the petals into the nothing. And as it stretched, the flower began to worry that the emptiness might not like it. So the world flower decided to offer the emptiness 3 gifts. And the emptiness said, "More, please." And so it goes on in a beautiful creation story. And then it gets to the point where the person telling, or see, I already did it. The bee telling the story says, "This is the story of that clan of honeybees, Clan Apis." And then our darling Nayuki says, "Are you telling me that the entire universe came from a giant daisy? What do you call this, Devora? The big bloom theory?" So
all the time.
Funny off the bat, but also very scientifically accurate. So it's factual in all of the ways that matter, with a twist of dramatic adventure, which is what the author has said he aimed to do, because he aims to show us that just because they're tiny, these creatures can go on massive adventures, and the scale and the size of the creatures that they meet and the distances that they travel are so immense compared to like what our understanding of distance and creatures are. So the book is about learning to trust your instincts and building the confidence that just comes from existing in the world. And you see Nayuki turn from like a little cute larva that's just here to cause a ruckus and be obnoxious to really taking charge of her life and her community and becoming an important character in the hive, just as all of the other bees and their various roles are. So this is my favorite thing for anyone that loves bees or bugs. If you have a friend that's a beekeeper or anything like that, this is the greatest gift for them. It's a hug. It's like you're hugging a honeybee, which I do not recommend, except for in this book. So,
and I see what that like why Neil Gaiman would have been someone to endorse the books. What you were reading sounded very like Neil Gaiman, Terry Pratchett idea.
yeah, just very darkly dry humor. I love dry humor. So yeah, so that was my pick. I'm so glad that you asked. Allie, do you have any books that you would care to rant about in this lovely bookshop talk?
Always. Okay, the first one I brought to rant about is a YA. Yours was middle grade, so we're going from middle grade to YA. This book is called Fat Chance Charlie Vega by Crystal Maldonado, and Crystal is actually a Western Mass native. So you've probably seen her all over your Instagram at local bookstores, just being amazing. She is a Latina writer from Western Mass, and her main character is a fat Latina teenager in high school, navigating romance with her best friend. Her best friend's name is Amelia. And I picked up this book because I was really intrigued about the romance, because that's like one of the main plot points is romance, because Charlie Vega is a writer. The character's a writer, just like Crystal. And Charlie Vega is like very excited or kind of focused on the idea of love and having love for many different reasons that are completely valid, based on her home life and her past and her love of love, because she writes a lot of love stories. But I think what really gets me excited about this book and what kept me reading, because I loved reading love stories as a teenager. Like Sarah Dessen was my girl. I loved everything that she wrote. So I was like, oh, I'm gonna love this. I was 3 chapters and I had to put the book down, and I was like, I've never seen this before. This is like a new experience for me. That the main real love story at the core of the book is between Charlie and her best friend Amelia. So Charlie and Amelia are both in high school. Charlie, as I said, is a fat Latina girl, and Amelia is a thin, tall, dark-skinned girl. And so they have very different experiences because of their body types, because of their race, because of their home lives are very different. And they really, like, Crystal really explores that in a really great way. Like, at no point when people are treated badly in this book does the reader ever think that that's okay, which I also thought was wonderful, especially for YA books. Charlie and Amelia love each other so much, and they put their relationship before everything. And usually what I felt was different is usually in YA between two female characters, especially female characters whose main kind of storyline revolves around romance, they kind of come into themselves and come into their own emotional intelligence through trauma, or through like a breakup, or by coming together with the love interest. And so by the end of the book, they're like, I'm in myself, I'm in my feelings, I know who I am. But they were like that at the beginning of the book. So they clearly have this really deep, honest, vulnerable, emotional connection with each other. Like, they don't lie to each other. Part of the story is the things that they have hidden from each other, but for the most part, they go to each other about everything. And there's nothing like, I'll read you the beginning, because the beginning starts off with Amelia, like her relationship with her boyfriend at the time. And Amelia is queer. I love her so much. She's one of my favorite characters in the book. But her boyfriend, they're going through a new step in their relationship. And Amelia brings that to Charlie, and Charlie's like, wow, that makes me feel a lot of things about myself and where I'm at in my life, but I know that that's a selfish thought, and so I'm going to be here for you however you need me to. And I, as a reader, was just like, oh my god. Yes. Okay, so there's a couple of things that are happening, and one of them is that Amelia is thinking about telling her boyfriend that she loves him. And this is not a spoiler. We're only like this far in. I would never spoil anything, especially of a love story. Absolutely not. So Amelia is telling Charlie. So Amelia says, I know I can, as in tell him I love him. I know I can. It's just, I don't want to be seen as clingy or anything. She plays with her fries. You know what people say about girls who say they love the guy first? Dudes will ghost you or break up with you or whatever. And Charlie says, well, I think you have to be okay with him not saying it back right away. You have to feel good enough, strong enough in your feelings that it'll be okay if he needs more time. I take her hand, but he probably will say it right back, because how could he not love my beautiful, wonderful, amazing best friends? She gave me a gentle smile, but I can tell I haven't persuaded her. Right? I prod. Oh, it's just so great. They're already she first tells her like, hey, I think you're doing a great thing. It's a really valid step. I like value your feelings. I think that your fear comes from something that's not real. Like if he doesn't say it back, that has nothing to do with you. You should express your feelings anyway. And then the second part of it is her like, encouraging her and being like, yeah, but and if he like, it would be so silly if your worst fear came true that he didn't say it back, because it would be so silly if he doesn't love you like I love you because you're amazing. And I'm just like, oh my God. I want that's what I want. Oh my gosh. It's so, and they're just like that through the whole book. And even when they meet challenges that challenge how they each see each other and how they get along, like they never stop loving each other and saying, no, your feelings are real and they're wonderful and I love you. Oh, it's just so good. And I just think this is such a good book to give YA readers who are looking for romance or who are looking for friendship stories. I think it's a great beach read, but throughout the book, Charlie, it loves like very comforting things. So she's often like putting on sweaters and sitting in her room with twinkle lights on and like writing on her laptop. And it just feels so cozy. So it's a good year-round book. And I'm trying not to rant forever, but that was, yeah, I love Charlie Vega. It's so good.
It feels so important to have the representation of a young adult or teenage friendship in a romance novel, because I feel like there's such the classic trope of the main character has to choose between their love interest and their best friend, and then half of the book is them, and that's like the rising action and becomes the conflict. So it seems like that's not really where this book is going.
No, and female characters don't need to fight all the time, and your female characters don't have to have the same gender or sexuality to understand and support each other either. It's just so good. Yeah, shocking, I know. But again, after you and I grew up reading, like I think the romance novels you and I grew up reading are going to be so different from what's coming out now, which is amazing because it just...
I was thinking about that earlier as well when you were talking about how secure these characters are in their feelings. I feel like as teenagers, our generation was very much defined by, we don't know what's going on, we don't know what to feel, yay. And I don't know if it's the rise, maybe people are communicating about feelings more than they used to, or we have more emotional literacy now, but I'm noticing that young people are much more confident, it seems, in saying like what they need and how they feel than I was at that age. So I applaud you, Gen Z.
I'm in my 20s and reading this, I felt like I learned something about being open and emotional and vulnerable, which is like just speaks to what you just said, where I'm like, wow. And recommended to adults. You're right. It's not just for young readers. Anybody can take something from this about love and friendship. And it's also so funny and has a lot of nerd references. So if you like nerd references, definitely. Okay, I'm going to call time on myself. What is your next book that you brought?
I'm so glad you asked, Allie. So, my next pick to rant about is Elatsoe by Darcy Little Badger. Oh, look at that foil work. I love the cover of this book so much. Just the illustrations are done by Rovina Kai. So this is our main character, Ellie. Oh, her full name is Elatsoe. And she is Lipan Apache. She's 17. And she also just has the casual ability to call ghosts up to the realm of the living. You know, whatever. So this is a power that is passed down to her through her family tree. And she's not the only one in this world that has magical powers. Her best friend happens to be like the grandchild of Oberon, you know, the Fae King, whatever, casual stuff. It's contemporary fantasy. It's set in the Southwest of North America, mostly Texas. And there are some major Scooby-Doo vibes in this book. I know you see me, Allie. It is so good. It's basically, it's a ghost story. So at the very beginning of the book, her uncle comes to her and tells her to avenge his death. Ooh. So wild, teenagers running off, chasing bad guys through haunted mansions kind of vibes, solving mysteries. And who doesn't love kids, solving murders and getting involved in colonial conspiracies way above their heads? So it's ghost story. But the other thing that I really appreciated for myself was Darcy Little Badger, the author, didn't just say, yep, this girl is native and moves on. It is part of her identity, and the author, Darcy, also doesn't shy away from the realities of native dispossession and colonization. It sort of becomes a subplot, actually, where she's consistently acknowledging its existence and sort of the rippling generational trauma that is then amplified because of this magical world that they exist in. So it imagines our world as if there was magic in it. It has the terrible history that is European colonization of North America, and it doesn't avoid it, but it also isn't what the story is about. It's kind of just, hey, this is here. Okay, now we're moving back to the ghosts, which as a reader, I appreciated that she just mentioned it and that she brought it into the conversation. I'm going to read you a part.
Okay.
I'm not going to spoil anything. Just a little part. Okay. This is your last warning, Vivian shouted. Leave us alone. This is my home, my people's home. You aren't welcome along the Kunitai. You aren't welcome in my home. She slammed the brakes and the vampire flew off the car, tumbling down the cement road. He stood, pinned by headlights. What was that? He shouted. He grinned like Vivian had made a joke. For a moment, Ellie wondered if her mother had made a mistake. Nothing happened until the grin faltered. What have you done? The vampire asked. I feel like, no, this is a public road. You have no rights over it. None. You might survive, Vivian said, but not here. We're Lippin Apache. So, he screeched, is that like magical? No, Christ, we're indigenous to the southern US and northern Mexico. Really, you've never heard of us. I know what the Apaches were, but were. This land is still our home, and Eurovamps can't occupy a home where they're unwelcome. I pay taxes. This is a public road. You don't pay taxes to my people. If you want a chance to live, start running north. Don't stop until you're off our land. How large is Apache land? He asked, backing away from the minivan. Before colonization, Vivian said, we were a cyclical people moving with the seasons. Our home is vast. Dun, dun, dun.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So Vivian's her mother. Vivian is such a cool lady, supports her even when she's like, I'm gonna go, stake out this old white guy's house in the middle of the night. She's like, okay, I don't think that's a good idea, but I understand why you need to do this, so I'm gonna come with you. So I really appreciate that. Parents in YA novels are historically either absent or terrible, all of the things. So the fact that her parents are behind her and support her feels really, really important to me.
I think that's becoming like a kind of a shift in children's literature, because we've been talking about that a lot with a lot of the new books we've seen. Like I really like the graphic novel Allergic, Fat Chance Charlie Vega with certain characters. This book, and because in children's lit, if you think about it historically, and if you like Disney movies also, even if you're not into children's literature, like the parents have to be absent in order for the child to have an adventure, because if the parent was present, the child would never have the freedom to have these adventures like Pippi Longstocking or Alice in Wonderland. So I like now we have the parents in the books now, but instead of it being you're not allowed to go anywhere and then the kids have to break the rules in order to survive or succeed, the parents are like, I don't think that's a great idea, so I'm just going to come with you, which I love that. Yeah, we can still
parental
get stuff done.
sidekicks.
I still trust you and you know what you are and what you're doing. Yeah. Nice.
I think it's really empowering as well for younger readers. Because, I always saw those depictions of people my age going on adventures, but I was like, oh, I'll never be able to go on adventures because I have parents.
Yeah.
So now I feel like that's sort of, it's changing the outlook that I think I have sort of towards adventuring, even though now I know that that's not a thing. No, it's a thing. You can go on adventures and solve ghost stories. You can. Magic is real. This book just made me so happy. It was such a good mystery read. It felt validating and it was exciting. And then, you know, by the time you get to the climax of the story, you just can't put it down because it's so good and it is so much is going on. You're like, oh my God, I got it. What? No, what did she do? Like, you get very invested in the characters, and there's that moment where they have like a badass costume change, and all of these cool queer women come in to help them, and they're all wearing like great pantsuits, and they're like, no one's gonna notice that we're actually here to mess the place up.
I love a good costume change.
Gotta love
highly underrated in literature.
Yes, it's my favorite thing. So costume change, can't go wrong. That's it.
Okay, I've been waiting for this. I've been waiting for this one. Okay,
turn it up.
So, as many people who have come in the Carle Bookshop asking for middle grade recommendations know, Watership Down is my favorite book of all time. It's from 1972, written by Richard Adams. This is my copy from high school. Whenever I talk about this book, I love it so much. It is one of the best, I think, adventure stories ever written. I don't know whether to classify it as sci-fi or fantasy, or even just contemporary fiction, because as you were saying earlier, your excellent point about the way of the hive, and we talked about this a lot at the Carle. One of our exhibitions last year was about anthropomorphized animals in children's literature. And one of the things we discussed in that exhibit, which was wonderful, was about how anthropomorphism, like the way of making animals behave like human beings instead of like animals, is a great storytelling device. But as well, it can also be, because it's basically, as you said, like humans in animal costume, it can also be a way that historically writers and illustrators have like erased different people's identities and used it to avoid talking about certain topics. So I don't think that applies to the way of the hive, because as you said, it's using anthropomorphism to help you understand a species of insect and like their very real lives. And Watership Down, which I think a lot of people don't know because they're like, oh man, it's a classic, I don't want to read a classic, or it's just about rabbits, I don't like rabbits. But one of the most interesting parts about it is that they're not humans animal costumes. The rabbits in the story and none of the animals in the story can do anything that is outside of what they would normally be able to do. And that was because of Richard Adams' dedication to teaching children naturalism and like accurate things about nature, because the book started out as a story that he was telling his children on a road trip. So he talks about, my edition has an introduction from Richard Adams, and he talks about that to make the rabbits as convincing as possible, I had recourse to The Private Life of the Rabbit by R.M. Lockley, a well-known English naturalist and ornithologist. And they spent a long time together going on walks and talking about rabbits, because the Lockley had spent a couple years studying rabbit behavior. So all of the rabbit behavior in the book is accurate to nature, and at the same time, because it's a story about classism, fascism, and immigration, they have their own spiritual culture and religious history and their own language. So you also get the Lapine glossary in the back of the book with all of the specific words that are specific to rabbit culture, which is so cool. So it's a great book to kind of get into if you're a young reader, or you're just a reader looking for fantasy and you're not really necessarily looking for a series, but you are looking for a book with a map and a book with like its own language. This is a great choice. So I'll read you example. I think what most people quote from Watership Down is the beginning, where they talk about the creation of the rabbit, talking about the first rabbit, Ella Ray Ra, which is kind of a direct you could compare it to Jesus Christ or other figures. And so that is their religion, and part of rabbit religion is telling stories and connecting with each other and building community. I know. So the rabbits are in the woods, and there is a dog in the woods, and they are trying to get out of the woods before the dog realizes that they're there, because they have left their warren and they're trying to find a new warren, and that the better place that they're trying to seek is called Watership Down, and that's their journey. So on this, they've come upon the river, and they're trying to find a way to cross, and all the rabbits are very confused about how to make this happen. And Hazel, who is the accidental leader of the group, notices that there is a piece of wood floating on the river. He's trying to explain that they could cross the river on the piece of wood, that they would float if they go on the piece of wood. And all the rabbits are very confused, because they're like, I don't. And Hazel himself doesn't really understand either, but it's something that he'd seen before. Hazel, he said quickly, that's a piece of flat wood, like that piece that closed the gap by the green loose above the warren. Do you remember? It must have drifted down the river, so it floats. We could put Fiver and Pipkin on it and make it float again. It might go across the river. Can you understand? Hazel had no idea what he meant. Blackberry's flood of apparent nonsense only seemed to draw tighter the mesh of danger and bewilderment. As though Bigwig's angry impatience, Pipkin's terror, and the approaching dog were not enough to contend with, the cleverest rabbit among them had evidently gone out of his mind. He felt close to despair, because he's like, what are you talking about? And so they have to work together to get across this river. And everything that you think is going to happen at the end of the story actually happens, and you're in the middle. And you're like, oh, where are we going to go from here? And then you get to go on an even bigger adventure using all of the tools that they've learned and the friendships they've built in the first half of the book to do the second half of the book. And it's just so wonderful. And it's my favorite book of all time. I can't stop talking about it. I would recommend anyone who's never tried it to try it. I can't speak well about it enough. And yeah, I know that I definitely know the movie traumatized some of us as kids.
How do you think Beatrix Potter would feel about Watership Down?
I think she would love it. I think one thing a lot of people maybe not know about Beatrix Potter is that she put a lot of work into her art. All of the plant life in Beatrix Potter's work is accurate to life, because she never wanted to teach children anything inaccurate about nature, because she thought nature was so wonderful in itself that you didn't need to make anything up. And she was a very successful naturalist in England. She actually bought a lot of land and kept it in trust. She saved a lot of the English countryside. And so she and Richard Adams both have a goal of they just want to teach kids about nature and about how wonderful it is, and how it's a lot more complex than you may realize. You can read this 100 times and you can find new things every time you read it about nature, human nature, Western ideas of human nature, naturalism, found family, friendship, even patriarchy and masculinity are explored a lot in the book, which I like a lot. Yeah.
It sounds highly critical.
It is. Yeah, it's fun too, but like you can read it and choose how you want to enjoy it. Is this like my awesome fantasy epic hero's adventure, or is this I'm going to read this too because I want to discuss with myself and others like the role that human beings have had in the environment. It's just so good. And I have to stop myself because I will keep talking.
We gotta call it.
Yeah, Hannah knows better than to ask me about it like while we're working, because I will just go off on it.
There was someone that like saw it on the shelf and was like, oh, Watership Down, I love that book. And I immediately see Allie on the other side of the store, just like, Watership Down.
What? You want to hear an entire verbal history of the book? I can do that for you.
And I never even thought of it as a middle grade book. I guess like when I was reading all of these books for school, I didn't really piece together that they were written for a younger audience. I didn't really think about it that much, but it definitely is. It's kind of like a introduction to fascism if you want.
Yeah. Or environmentalism if you want. And I think you can also, I'd probably recommend it like ages, maybe like 10 and up, honestly, because it's also something he wrote it, he was reading it aloud to his children and they really liked it. So as long as you're reading it aloud with the intention to, when you get those questions about like, why are they being treated this way? Or why at the beginning of the book, when they are leaving their warren, why does the people in charge of the warren not want to let them leave? Like why do people hold on to power in the ways that they do? And that's a really, I mean, that's a conversation, like young readers have those questions. And so it's a great book to like bring those questions up in a way that's, you can easily explain using rabbits. So
it's metaphorical. So I think that didn't take too much time, and that probably does it for us. So let us know some of your favorite books to rant about. And thanks so much for joining us for another Bookshop Talk. We really enjoy doing them.
Thanks, everyone. Have a